June 17th, 2015, a date that no Charlestonian will forget. They'll remember where they were that day. I think of John F. Kennedy's assassination, November 22nd, 1963. I was in the third grade, but I remember exactly coming home from school and how I felt. Feel the same way about the terrible massacre at Mother Emanuel Church on June the 17th of 2015. We all couldn't believe it. We heard it on the news, and then we watched and couldn't believe what had happened. And then 2 days later, as a bond hearing was held and numerous family members came forward to express just unbelievably their forgiveness to this perpetrator, this demon. It was an amazing act of forgiveness and of God's grace. For me personally, it brought back other memories from my childhood. Although born in Charleston, my parents moved to Orangeburg in the mid-60s, and I was there a young man, only in the 8th grade in 1968, when the Orangeburg massacre occurred, and 3 African Americans were gunned down by police officers. Another night and period I'll never forget in my life. And to think that as a grown man in 2015, after having decided to run for the esteemed position of mayor of Charleston, almost 50 years later after the Orangeburg massacre, in essence, another massacre occurred here in Charleston by a young man wanting to start a race riot. Up until that time that year, I'd been busy with the dream of serving this city, my campaign, my quest to become mayor. And 40 years of Mayor Riley's service here in Charleston, which had become historic in itself and legendary. Many folks in the community, many citizens, no matter who the victor, if you will, of that year's mayoral race was thinking through their minds, what happens after Joe Riley? I mean, our city had become so used to him being our leader, and a great one he was. But after June 17th, 2015, my whole mindset changed from that question in that campaign in my life and for our community. Not what happens after Joe Riley, but what happens after Mother Emanuel. And will we have the kind of commitment that we need going forward? In the light of the grace that was shown by Mother Emanuel, the congregation, the families, in light of that grace, will we move forward with the kinds of action, the kinds of progress, the kind of determination to heal racial wounds in our community and our country? That's the question, and still remains so today. It's so poignant to be here making this film for you today that a little over a week ago, that George Floyd was maliciously murdered in Minneapolis. And that same scab over the wound of racial division and injustice has been pulled off again. We find ourselves once again in this spot of evaluating where we are, where we've been, and where we're going in terms of racial reconciliation or conciliation. Because as has been pointed out, How can you bring back together what ain't never been together to start with? Elected later that year, in 2015, we as a community have tried to keep in mind the grace and compassion of Mother Emanuel as a guiding light for our city, and to use the lens as we look at issues throughout our community of education to housing to economic empowerment, that we think about needed progress going forward. And it did lead our city to an apology for the cities of Charleston direct involvement in the administration of the institution of slavery in our city. Very poignant here in the city of Charleston, such a historic city, and this, our 350th birthday in 2020. But most of that 350 years has been comprised with slavery, racism, the end of Reconstruction, which was a glimmer of hope, Jim Crow, and it created a generational impact racism has in our city and our society. And that's why we have to look through that lens of checking for equity in all that we do. Are we perfect as we try to do those things? No, that's why we've all got to be together and work together to make progress going forward. But after that apology, we were committed to hiring a diversity officer in the city of Charleston. Our city council approved doing a racial bias audit of our police department. And guess what? Racial disparities were found in traffic stops and use of force. And again, very poignant with what's going on in the country right now in 2020. We're working on those things. We are making progress here in Charleston. We're trying to set an example. Can we do more? We all must. But let's work on that together. Housing. We're committed to providing affordable housing in our city and working on many projects. But we realize what's happened over the decades with gentrification and the lack of economic empowerment. That's the hardest thing that we all need to work on together. So here at 5 years after a terrible tragedy, once again we find ourselves with introspection, reviewing where we are, where we need to go, sense of prayer, a thankfulness to God and to His amazing grace. I was present at Reverend Pinckney's funeral in 2015 when President Obama came and surprised us all as he led us with his wonderful rendition of Amazing Grace. It was the most powerful group prayer remembrance that I can remember. And so the next year, I got to meet her. Joan Baez came to Charleston. It was 2 years later. And she had picked up a song, which now I play every now and again, commemorating that funeral and that feeling that we had when the president sang Amazing Grace, when my president sang Amazing Grace. It was moving. It was a tribute not only to those 9 who died, but to those 5 who survived, to the whole congregation of Mother Emanuel Church, to that sense of forgiveness, to that compassion that was shown, which I must tell you, in my estimation, it was the truest representation of God's love that we've ever witnessed. Please join me in a meditation and remembrance of the beautiful lives of the angels of the Emanuel Nine: Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, Dr. DePayne Middleton, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Tywanza Sanders, Reverend Daniel Lee Simmons Jr., Sharonda Coleman Singleton, and Myra Thompson. They are an inspiration to our city, that we might be a city on the hill, a lamp on the pedestal, to be a reflection of their love and service and God's love in this world.